Hey guys! Tonight we slip into the dim glow of a candlelit chapel, where the air feels thick with incense and the soft shuffle of pilgrims' feet. You're standing there, blinking in the flicker, trying to convince yourself that you're ready for what medieval people once accepted as perfectly normal. Saints who leaked sweet-smelling oils, glowed faintly at night, or levitated just enough to make a passing monk drop his bread loaf. And you probably won't survive this, at least not without raising an eyebrow or two, because these miracles weren't whispered rumors. Many were witnessed by entire villages who swore they saw something real. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, let me know your location and the local time down in the comments. I love seeing where everyone is listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You take your first slow step forward. The stone floor is cold enough to make your feet curl a little, and the scent of beeswax candles wraps around you like a warm shawl. A small crowd is already gathered near an alcove, huddled in the hush that only happens when everyone thinks something sacred is going on. You drift closer, careful not to bump into the elderly woman leaning on her cane. She absolutely looks like she'd whack you for interrupting the moment, and there, resting in a glass-fronted reliquary, lies the reason you're all here, the body of a medieval holy figure who has been weeping tiny drops of fragrant oil for several nights. One mainstream historical fact to keep you grounded. Medieval Europe had a long tradition of incorruptible saints' bodies said not to decay, which often drew enormous pilgrim crowds. Some genuinely did decompose more slowly than expected, thanks to cold climates, dry stone tombs, or sheer luck of preservation. Monasteries documented these cases carefully, partly for devotion and partly, as you can imagine, to encourage tourism. A good saint could do wonders for local economies. Picture a medieval travel brochure. Come for the relics, stay for the barley stew. You lean in a little closer, eyes narrowing as you study the faint moisture on the saint's cheek. The crowd around you murmurs. Some swear the scent is floral. Others insist it smells like honey. You, meanwhile, are mostly thinking it smells a bit like that weird essential oil diffuser your roommate once bought calming, but suspiciously strong. Here's your first quirky tidbit. There were recorded cases where saints' bodies produced what looked like myrrh, a thick resin used in perfumed oils. Modern scholars suspect some shrines used hidden sponges, natural seepage from embalming substances, or even condensation in enclosed reliquaries. But villagers didn't know about humidity cycles. They just knew what they saw. And honestly, if you'd been working 12-hour days herding goats or grinding grain, you'd probably embrace a mystical oil leak too. It's the medieval equivalent of seeing your toaster flicker and assuming it's haunted because you haven't slept in 3 days. A monk near you clears his throat and begins describing the saint's other notable sign, a soft humming believed to come from inside the body. You raise a skeptical brow gently, because you're still trying to fall asleep here, and tilt your head. The monk explains that people from the next village over swore they heard it on calm nights. Historians still argue whether this humming was the vibration of wooden reliquary boxes, mice in the walls, or simply the collective imagination powering up like a medieval group project. Whatever the cause, entire congregations came forward insisting the sound was real. Shared belief has a way of amplifying faint noises into something extraordinary. You drift a little deeper into the dim alcove, letting the atmosphere settle around you. You imagine yourself living in an era where candles are your primary light source, where forests feel endless, and where the night sky without any streetlights seems dangerously alive. If your world feels mysterious every time the sun sets, miracles start to feel less like exceptions and more like natural parts of daily life. And the moment someone claims a holy person glows, well, that spreads faster than free bread on feast day. Glow, you ask? Yes, glow. Another strange sign attributed to several medieval saints was a faint light surrounding their bodies. Modern researchers point to natural bioluminescence from fungi, sometimes found on wooden coffins, the reflective shimmer of polished metal fittings, or even the accumulation of gases and oils inside sealed tombs that could produce a sheen. But back then, if you saw even the slightest glimmer, you'd probably clutch your cloak and start whispering prayers under your breath. Plus, dim candlelight exaggerates everything. This is also true for your reflection in a bathroom mirror at 3 a.m., but thankfully no one is canonizing you for that. As you stand there quietly, you recall stories of holy people whose wounds allegedly bled years after death, an unnerving detail that sounds like something right out of a medieval campfire story. But many of these accounts describe just a small red stain appearing on a cloth wrappings, often due to lingering pigments, mold growth, or earthy minerals seeping through. Once again, the natural world gets mistaken for the supernatural, something you absolutely would have done too, because medieval science basically boiled down to, does it look weird? Must be divine. You take a slow breath, letting the hum of whispers settle into the background like a soothing chant. A couple of pilgrims approach the reliquary and hold bits of cloth against the glass, hoping to absorb some of the fragrant oil. It feels oddly tender, almost domestic, like watching someone bottle morning dew because they think it carries good luck. Another pilgrim leans toward you conspiratorially and mutters that the saint once levitated 2 inches above her bed. You nod politely, reminding yourself to stay open-minded. Some hagiographies, those saint biographies monks love to write, do describe levitation. Most scholars believe these accounts were symbolic descriptions of spiritual elevation, not literal hovering. But every so often, an enthusiastic monk took symbolism a little too literally, and a legend was born. You picture one particularly imaginative scribe thinking, 2 inches seems modest. Let's make it 3. Joke number 2, in case you're keeping count. You continue watching the tiny droplets of oil glisten, feeling oddly soothed. There's something comforting about the blend of mystery, devotion, and quiet hope in this space. These people weren't gullible, they were trying to understand the world using what tools they had. If a saint's body produced sweet scent, that meant protection. If a faint glow surrounded a tomb, that meant comfort. And if the humming sound turned out to be a mouse nibbling grain behind the altar, well, that just meant the miracle needed a little reinterpretation. Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen from earlier tales? Medieval folks were no strangers to strange beliefs, but their world wasn't filled with frauds. It was filled with people trying to make sense of things that genuinely felt extraordinary. You step back slowly, letting the whispers fade behind you as you move toward the next dim corridor, ready to explore more myths that turned out to have roots in real, observable events. You follow the corridor's curve, your footsteps soft on the stone as the chapel's hush gives way to the distant bark of a dog and the faint rattle of leaves outside. The air cools noticeably, and you step into a wider hall where torchlight flickers across carved beams. Here, the atmosphere shifts less incense, more the earthy smell of old timber and damp wool cloaks. You realize you've wandered into the kind of space where townspeople once gathered to hear news, settle disputes, and sometimes, rather dramatically, accuse their neighbors of turning into wolves. Yes, werewolves. Not just bedtime ghost stories, but claims so serious they sometimes ended up in actual medieval court records. You pause, tilting your head as you imagine a notary, quill in hand, dutifully writing down testimony like, "The defendant did, on the night of St. Bridget's feast, grow fur and howl." You can almost hear the scratching of the quill and the internal monologue of the clerk thinking, "I definitely did not get paid enough for this." You step deeper into the hall, and it shifts into a kind of dreamlike reconstruction torches flickering, benches arranged in rows, the unmistakable tension of a community convinced something supernatural is stalking their fields. On the far end sits a long table where officials might once have gathered, shuffling parchment and trying to look authoritative, while secretly hoping no one expected them to test the defendant for actual fangs. Here's your first mainstream historical fact. Medieval Europe really did have trials where people were accused of being werewolves. These weren't Hollywood-style transformations under a full moon. Instead, villagers suspected individuals who seemed out of place, perhaps too solitary or too familiar with the woods, or just a bit too good at tracking animals. Some trials even included confessions, often given under duress, where the accused claimed they used ointments or belts of wolfskin to transform. Historians still argue whether these confessions reflect genuine belief, coercion, or the psychological strain of living in communities where rumors spread faster than fresh gossip at a feast. A gust of imagined night air brushes across your cheek, and you picture yourself trudging along a forest path, the moon pale above you and the woods alive with unfamiliar noises. In a world without electric lights, where wolves truly did roam and livestock meant the difference between survival and hunger, the idea of humans who could become wolves didn't feel absurd. It felt like a warning. If something moved strangely in the dark, or a neighbor returned with suspicious scratches, people connected the dots in the most dramatic way possible. You glide toward a bench as shadowy figures take form around you, villagers whispering anxiously. One woman swears she saw her neighbor running on all fours. Another insists she heard someone howling right outside her window. A third claims the accused had wolfish eyes. You can't help but think, well, after 2 sleepless nights, everyone's eyes look a bit wolfish. Joke number 1 for this round. The quirky tidbit of this section is a strange one. Some medieval accounts describe werewolf salves, herbal ointments believed to trigger transformation. A few recipes survive in old manuscripts, involving belladonna, henbane, and other hallucinogenic plants. When applied to the skin, they could cause vivid visions, disorientation, or the sensation of one's body shifting. So, someone stumbling through the woods while under the influence might genuinely feel lupine. And someone watching them might genuinely sprint back to town screaming. You approach the long table where a scribe sits, dipping his quill. The parchment before him lists questions for the accused, ranging from the ordinary, "Where were you on the night in question?" to the wonderfully bizarre, "Did you or did you not snack on a sheep while in wolf form?" The scribe looks exhausted, and you can't blame him. Imagine writing down such things with a straight face after 5 hours of testimony. You give him a sympathetic nod he cannot see. The accused sits nearby, thin, nervous, eyes darting with fear. He's bound lightly by rope, not because he might transform, but because medieval officials were very into ropes. You sit quietly beside him, as if sharing a bench at a bus stop, and he whispers that he's innocent. You believe him. Most accused were just unlucky people caught in storms of anxiety, superstition, and coincidence. If someone's sheep vanished and you were spotted near the forest that morning, congratulations, you are now a suspect. The hall flickers again, and suddenly you're outside. Moonlight silvering the fields. You hear a distant howl, and despite reminding yourself this is all atmospheric storytelling, you still flinch a little. Wolves really were a significant presence in medieval Europe. They prowled farmland edges, scavenged near villages, and occasionally attacked animals or desperate humans. People viewed wolves as symbols of both danger and cunning. So when strange tracks appeared or livestock disappeared, the leap from wolf to wolfman wasn't so large. Historians still debate whether some so-called werewolves were simply individuals suffering from conditions like hypertrichosis, excessive hair growth, or severe behavioral illnesses that communities didn't understand. Others wonder whether certain accused people embraced the myth to craft a kind of fearsome identity, an early form of branding, but instead of a TikTok handle, you get a legendary growl. Joke number 2, gentle but appreciated. You wander farther, listening to the rustle of leaves as the accused man's story continues quietly in your mind. He explains how he once found a wolf pelt and wore it as a cloak during a storm. Someone saw him and panicked. Rumors spun from a single moment, and soon the entire village believed he roamed the woods with glowing eyes. One woman claimed she saw him chase a boar with great enthusiasm. Honestly, you've chased a bus with great enthusiasm before. No one called you a werewolf. Joke 3. You pause under a tree, noticing claw marks on the bark real wolf sign, real tension. It becomes easier to understand how medieval people confused predators for transformed neighbors. When fear and folklore blend, Reality bends just enough to let myths walk beside you. The scene softens again as you drift back toward the hall. The trial continues, but the mood shifts. The officials lean closer, asking the accused whether he used enchanted belts or potions. He shakes his head rapidly. One man murmurs that the moonlight changed him. Another says transformation leaves behind an unusual smell. You lean forward trying to sniff discreetly, but all you smell is hay and anxiety. Still, this is where myth touches truth. Court records prove these discussions happened. These weren't campfire stories, they were legal proceedings. People genuinely believed the line between human and wolf was porous, especially at night when sounds stretched and shadows deepened. You step back from the trial, letting the voices soften and prepare to slip deeper into the maze of myths that felt completely plausible to the medieval mind, each rooted in something real, whether it was fear, nature, misunderstanding, or the powerful sway of belief. You ease away from the echoing hall of wolfish accusations and follow a narrow, sloping passage where the air warms and takes on a comforting, herbal fragrance, something like dried rosemary and old books. Your steps slow naturally, as if your body senses you're heading toward a quieter corner of medieval life. The world of healing charms, whispered remedies, and so-called magic that actually worked more often than anyone admits. You blink as the space around you shifts into a humble cottage interior. A smoky hearth blurs the edges of the room, weaving soft ribbons of scent lavender bundles, crushed mint, maybe a hint of honey left too close to the fire. A woman in a simple wool dress leans over a wooden table, grinding something with a stone mortar. You've stepped into the home of a medieval healer, one of those individuals villagers would visit when they needed help, and absolutely did not want the local lord to find out why. Her hands move in practiced circles, and she murmurs a charm under her breath. It's not dramatic, no lightning crackles, no sudden wolf transformations. You're safe this time. Just a gentle chant that sounds more like a lullaby than a spell. You stand nearby, listening, letting the cadence wash over you. Sleepy as it is, the charm has structure, rhythm, repetition, and focused intention. You realize it's less supernatural poetry and more early cognitive therapy. Joke number 1. Medieval self-care was basically aromatherapy plus a pep talk minus the bath bombs. A mainstream historical fact slips into place. Many medieval charms were combinations of practical herbal remedies and spoken words meant to reinforce calmness and healing. Peppermint for stomach issues, willow bark for pain relief, yarrow for inflammation, these ingredients are still used today, just with fewer rhyming couplets attached. Monks kept detailed records of plant properties, and village healers passed down knowledge orally. The idea that a charm only worked if spoken correctly wasn't superstition alone. It helped ensure the healer remembered the recipe precisely. Repetition keeps the ratio right, even when measuring spoons haven't been invented yet. The healer finishes grinding her mixture a paste of crushed garlic, thyme, and vinegar and spreads it onto a linen strip. You watch curiously. Garlic? Vinegar? It sounds like the beginning of an overambitious salad dressing. But this is your quirky tidbit. Versions of this garlic and vinegar poultice appear in several medieval manuscripts and likely had some antibacterial effects thanks to natural compounds in the garlic. People once thought it warded off evil spirits. Modern researchers have tested similar recipes and found surprising antimicrobial properties. So yes, medieval folks had a magical anti-infection wrap that doubles as something you might accidentally make while trying a new recipe. She hands the poultice to you, and you hold it carefully, feeling the warmth of freshly crushed herbs seep through the cloth. Place this on the wound, she murmurs, her voice soft and steady. And say the charm 3 times. You're tempted to whisper it right now, but you settle for nodding politely. Inside, you think, if only all modern medical instructions were this soothing. Imagine your doctor handing you antibiotics while humming a chant and lighting a lavender candle. Would it cure you faster? Probably not. Would it improve the vibes? Absolutely. You move to the cottage doorway where a patient sits on a stool, a shepherd clutching his ankle. You crouch beside him, noticing a reddish scrape and bits of grass stuck in the wool of his sock. He explains he slipped while trying to rescue a wandering sheep. Of course he did. Medieval livestock had the same energy as modern toddlers. No sense of danger, maximum chaos. Joke number 2. You place the poultice gently on his ankle, and the healer begins her soft chant again, each repetition perfectly timed with the crackle of the hearth. You join in, a little offbeat, but no one seems bothered. The charm feels peaceful, grounding. Words have always held power, not mystical lightning bolt power, but the type that makes a scared or hurting person feel calmer. And calmer bodies heal better. Historians still argue whether medieval charms were believed literally or symbolically. Some say people trusted the words themselves. Others think the spoken elements were meant to reinforce the healer's authority or focus. It was probably both. When you live in a world where winter can wipe out a village's food supply, you cling to anything that offers comfort, especially if it's wrapped in linen and smells pleasantly of garlic. As the charm ends, the shepherd exhales, shoulders loosening. The healer ties the poultice in place with a narrow strip of wool and hands him a small bundle of herbs to simmer at home. You notice one odd sprig sticking out feathery, silvery leaves. The healer explains it's wormwood, used for stomach troubles. Modern science confirms it contains compounds that affect digestion and appetite, though you're also aware it's the same plant used in certain liquors that make people do questionable things. Medieval remedies are multitasking like that. You step outside into the cool evening, following the shepherd as he limps away with gratitude. The air smells of early spring wet earth, fresh grass, and faint wood smoke from nearby cottages. You imagine villagers whispering about the healer's work. Did she really cure illness? Did she speak to spirits? Did she just have a very good garden? Probably a mix of all three, because medieval rumor mills were relentless. As you walk, you notice a carved talisman hanging from a tree branch, a small wooden disc etched with swirling patterns. This, too, was a charm. People hung these outside homes to ward off illness or protect animals. You touch it lightly. The wood is warm from the sun, smooth from handling. Whether it worked or not, it offered a sense of control in a time when disease could sweep through without warning. And if nothing else, it looks nicer than the live, laugh, love signs of today. Joke number 3. You continue on, deeper into the village. A mother stirs a pot over her fire, adding herbs you recognize from the healer's table. A merchant ties a small charm to his cart before setting off at dawn insurance against potholes and bad luck. A shepherd whispers a rhyme while counting his sheep. You tell yourself it's for good fortune and not just terrible early math skills. Everywhere you turn, belief and practical knowledge weave together like threads in a sturdy cloak. Nothing is purely magical, and nothing is entirely mundane. Medieval life lived in that middle space where reality and legend shook hands and decided to share the same fire. And as the night settles gently across the village roofs, you step forward, ready to leave the warm glow of healing charms behind and wander toward mysteries even stranger and even more real than whispered remedies. You leave behind the cozy cottage glow and follow a winding dirt path that feels almost too quiet, like the world is holding its breath. The sky above you dims to a soft, grayish green, an odd tint that makes the landscape feel slightly unreal, as if you've stepped into the edges of a dream. The air cools, the wind hushes, and then, somewhere ahead, you hear the faintest rustle like two small figures shifting in tall grass. You slow your steps. The path opens into a broad field beside a chalky hillside, its surface streaked with narrow rabbit paths and the faint outlines of old mining pits. You take in the scene carefully, remembering exactly where you are. The outskirts of a medieval English village where one of the strangest stories in all of medieval lore took place. A legend so bizarre and so oddly grounded in surviving records that people still argue about it centuries later. The story of the Green Children of Woolpit. You approach the dip in the earth where villagers once claimed they found two children sitting wide-eyed, trembling, and unmistakably green. Not ate too much spinach green. Not bad Instagram filter green, but truly, visibly, startlingly green-skinned. You hear a soft gasp and turn toward the sound. Two children stand just at the edge of the pit, thin as saplings, dressed in unfamiliar clothing, eyes round and distrustful. Their skin glows faintly with an olive green tint, like leaves held up to sunlight. You blink once, twice, but the color doesn't vanish. You step carefully closer, feeling a little like you're approaching a pair of startled forest creatures. A mainstream historical fact settles into the moment. The earliest written accounts of the Green Children appear in the 12th century chronicles of Ralph of Coggeshall and William of Newburgh, two medieval authors who generally wrote about real events. That alone makes this mystery worth paying attention to. They weren't writing fairy tales. They were recording things people in their time swore actually happened. The children stare at you silently. You kneel slowly, not too close, not too threatening, and introduce yourself in the softest tone you can manage. They don't understand a word. Not because you're using modern slang, but because, according to the medieval chronicles, the children spoke an entirely unfamiliar language when first discovered. Villagers couldn't communicate with them for days. Imagine trying to explain, "Come with us, we won't hurt you," when the kids look like they've climbed out of a parallel forest dimension. A quirky tidbit floats up as you study their faces. Villagers claim the children refused all food except raw beans. Not cooked beans, not stew. Just the raw, uncooked kind they could pry from freshly cut stalks. One chronicle says they wouldn't eat anything else until they were nearly faint with hunger. You can almost picture the local baker sighing dramatically, hands on hips, muttering, "Honestly, kids, these days." Joke number one for this section: you beckon gently for the children to follow you, and they do, but with hesitant, deer-like steps. Together you walk toward the village, its thatched rooftops peeking above hedgerows like tufts of straw-colored fur. Smoke curls from chimneys. A dog barks in the distance. Everything feels normal except the green children at your side. As you approach the outskirts, villagers emerge, whispering behind their hands. Some stare openly, some cross themselves, and one very confused goat simply stares as if reevaluating its entire understanding of the world. You lean down and whisper, "Don't worry, they're friendly," though you're not entirely sure if you're reassuring the children or yourself. Historians still argue whether the children were truly green or simply appeared green due to illness, malnutrition, or exposure to unusual environmental conditions. Some theories suggest iron deficiency anemia or chlorosis, a condition that can give skin a greenish tint. Others propose that the green color was symbolic, later exaggerated or misconstrued by chroniclers. Like many medieval mysteries, the truth flickers somewhere between medical explanation and myth. The children are placed in the care of a kind villager, a woman who, from the look of her warm smile and aproned attire, has overseen many lost souls and probably a few disobedient chickens. She offers them bread. They recoil. She tries cheese. They shake their heads. She tries apples. No luck. Finally, realizing desperation is setting in, she brings a basket of broad beans. The children immediately perk up, tearing into the pods with such enthusiasm that you're genuinely impressed by their commitment to legumes. Joke number two. Days pass in a soft blur as you remain in the village, watching the children adjust. Their green tint fades slowly as they begin eating a broader diet. Their language emerges in fragments choppy, unfamiliar sounds that villagers struggle to interpret. But gradually, one of the children, a girl, starts to communicate. She tells a story so strange you feel the air thicken just listening to it. She explains that she and her brother came from a place where the sun never rose fully, where daylight glowed dim and perpetual twilight covered the land. She speaks of rivers, meadows, and a distant, radiant place across a boundary they could not cross. One day, while tending animals, the siblings followed a sound bells, maybe, and wandered into a cavern. They walked in darkness, then stepped out into brilliant sunlight, overwhelming and blinding. And when they turned back, their home had vanished. You shiver a soft, curious shiver, not a frightening one. Her description echoes otherworldly places from folklore, subterranean lands, twilight realms, liminal spaces, yet it also resembles real landscapes, like certain cave systems or densely forested valleys. The details feel both fantastical and grounded at the same time. Historians still argue whether this tale reflects real childhood confusion, a lost foreign community, or an allegorical embellishment layered over time. The boy, sadly, grows ill and passes away shortly after arriving in the village, a detail confirmed by multiple medieval sources. You walk quietly through the small churchyard where villagers bury him, the earth cool beneath your feet, the air filled with the scent of damp grass and early evening. The girl, however, survives. She learns English, grows into adulthood, and eventually works in a local household. Some accounts even claim she lived a reasonably ordinary life, green childhood aside. As you stand there, reflecting on the strange mixture of fact and legend, a light joke drifts through your mind. Maybe the real miracle here is getting a medieval teenager to eat anything besides beans. Joke number 3. You leave the churchyard and stroll back toward the twilight field, where you first encountered the children. The evening sky glows faintly, green coincidence or memory. You can't tell. You run your fingers across the tall grass, soft and whispering, and consider how stories like these survive. Not because they make sense, but because they blur the line between reality and imagination just enough to make people lean forward instead of turning away. You breathe deeply, the field quiet around you, and step onward, ready to slip into the next forgotten corner of medieval myth where music, storms, and strange natural truths intertwine. You drift onward into the soft, shifting hush of another medieval night, and before you realize it, the air around you begins to thrum with a low, rolling vibration. At first, you think it's just your imagination, some leftover echo from the chanting halls you left behind in the last section, but then the breeze lifts, and the grass beneath your feet gently shivers. You tilt your head, listening. There it is again, a long, resonant growl traveling through the world like a distant drum roll. You're standing at the edge of a village, and the sky above you is bruising into a deep, heavy purple. A storm is coming. The kind medieval people didn't just endure, they interpreted. The first fat raindrops hit your shoulders, each making a tiny percussive tap, as if the clouds are testing out their rhythm before the real performance begins. As you walk along a muddy path, you notice a small group of villagers gathering near a wooden shelter, some clutching cloaks, some gripping charms carved from rowan wood, one fellow clutching what looks suspiciously like a frying pan for reasons you're absolutely certain he couldn't explain. Medieval folks believed storms could be messages, warnings, even living beings. And as thunder rumbles again, you feel the atmosphere tighten, the way a room shifts right before someone strikes a chord. A woman with a basket nods to you, her voice low and steady, as she explains that many people believe storms were shaped by supernatural music. Not heavenly choirs, not demonic screeching, more like cosmic bagpipes, thunder harps, and wind spirits blowing over the world like a giant flute. The clouds, she says matter-of-factly, are just the bellows. You blink at her, trying to imagine the sky as one giant medieval accordion, and you have to admit, it does give the thunder a different flavor. You start paying attention, listening for notes rather than random bursts of sound. That cracking boom overhead? A dramatic cymbal crash? Obviously. You wander farther down the path as the storm builds. The trees sway like performers, and the wind presses cold fingers down the back of your neck. A few goats scramble for shelter, bleating with the offended tone of creatures convinced the weather is happening to them personally. You get it. You felt that way during surprise meetings and unexpected dentist appointments. A quick flash lights up the path, bright and sharp, and the thunder that follows carries a deep, resonant timbre so smooth it would impress any bass singer. Mainstream medieval records note that people often believed storms were fueled by armies fighting in the sky, especially in parts of Northern Europe. But that wasn't the only thought. Some musical-minded chroniclers wrote that thunder was the sky clapping its hands, while others claimed lightning was the spark created when angels tuned their instruments. Historians still argue whether these musical metaphors were deeply held beliefs or just poetic attempts to explain the unexplainable. Whatever the truth, you can definitely feel why the storm inspired art and lore. There's something rhythmic about it, almost like the world is performing a sleepy percussion concert just for you. You find yourself following an elderly shepherd who seems entirely unbothered by the approaching deluge. He whistles softly as he walks, and to your surprise, the wind actually shifts in a way that makes it sound like it's harmonizing with him. He tells you, with absolute confidence, that certain melodies can calm a storm or at least convince it to pass by the village and ruin someone else's laundry instead. People like him believed music had power over weather, not in a wizard zapping lightning bolts way, but in a subtle, coaxing manner, the way you negotiate with a sleepy cat for more room on the bed. He demonstrates by whistling again, this time a steady rising and falling tune. You hear a high, trembling thread of sound as the wind moves through the reeds. It blends so perfectly you almost suspect he rehearsed with nature before you arrived. A quirky medieval tidbit claims that some musicians would actually go outside during storms and perform to appease the clouds, hoping to impress whatever forces were causing the thunderous uproar. Whether the storms appreciated the concerts is unknown, but you imagine at least one composer insisted he once got applause. Lightning forks across the sky, illuminating a small wooden shrine perched atop a hill. You've heard villagers whisper about it as you walked. They say it's dedicated to a weather spirit who dances inside storms, carving pathways among the clouds with every step. You decide to climb, listening to the rhythmic pattering of rain on earth as a soundtrack. As you near the shrine, the wind shifts again, this time a warmer current rising from the valley. It wraps around you like a gentle counter-melody to the storm's heavy percussion. At the top, you find a small carved figure, half human, half cloud, with swirling patterns representing wind and sound. The shrine smells faintly of damp cedar and crushed herbs. It's simple, peaceful, and surprisingly musical tiny bells hang from the eaves, chiming softly as the storm's breath brushes them. You stand there for a long moment, watching sheets of rain sweep across the fields below, each one moving with such fluid choreography that you can't help feeling as though the entire medieval night is performing a carefully rehearsed piece. You lean against the shrine, gazing into the dark blanket of clouds overhead. One medieval text claims storms were created by celestial musicians whose job was to keep the world awake when it grew too sleepy, which, considering the volume above you, feels like a very committed performance. Another said thunder was caused by dragons cleaning their teeth on mountains, which is concerning but admittedly imaginative dental care. Historians still argue whether those tales were metaphors, misunderstandings, or genuinely believed truths. You decide you're rooting for the dragon explanation mostly because it gives the storm a surprisingly organized, hygienic vibe. As the wind settles slightly, you hear something else. The slow, gentle gurgle of water weaving through a nearby ditch. The storm hasn't ended not even close, but the heavy percussion has softened enough for new sounds to emerge. It's like the world is segueing into a quieter movement in the symphony. You stretch out your hand, catching raindrops that cool your palm. The smell of wet earth rises around you, rich and grounding, pulling you deeper into the moment. When the storm reaches its peak again, you find yourself smiling despite the soaked hair plastered to your forehead. There's a strange comfort in the idea that medieval people saw storms not as random chaos, but as meaningful sound communication, art, or even emotional expression from the natural world. It makes every thunderclap feel less like a threat and more like a dramatic flourish. And as the rumbling carries across the valley, you feel sleep's slow tide creeping into your bones, lulled by the sky's relentless, ancient rhythm. You descend from the hillside shrine, boots squishing softly in the rain-soaked ground, and the storm's percussion gradually fades behind you like a concert moving into its intermission. The air grows calmer, warmer even, as though the world has turned a page. Ahead, a narrow forest path opens like a shadowed hallway, branches arching overhead in a tangled canopy. You step beneath it, brushing a few dripping leaves aside, and immediately the sound shifts again, subtle, hushed, full of those tiny noises forests like to keep just for themselves. Your feet carry you farther into the dim green light until you notice something startlingly unexpected, faint glimmers weaving among the branches. Little points of flickering warmth, almost like candles carried by invisible hands. You pause, squinting. The lights rise, fall, and swirl in a way that feels strangely intentional. They don't look like fireflies, not quite. They're brighter, steadier, and decidedly more coordinated, like they attended some kind of glow in the dark choreography workshop. Medieval Europeans believed forests were dense with unseen spirits, protective, mischievous, and occasionally helpful if you didn't offend them by, say, loudly discussing tax policy. These particular lights, drifting in gentle loops, match descriptions of beings people sometimes called will-o'-the-wisps or fairy flames. Tiny illusions, possibly sentient, possibly atmospheric, possibly your imagination getting way too into the ambiance. Historians still argue whether medieval accounts of such lights were inspired by natural gases igniting clever pranksters with lanterns, or people simply telling stories to explain the unexplainable. Whatever your modern brain tries to say, something undeniably magical seems to shimmer through the trees tonight. You walk deeper, your steps quiet on the mossy ground. The lights respond, drifting forward just enough to invite you onward, as if they have somewhere they want you to go. Maybe these spirits appreciate your company, or maybe they're hoping you've brought snacks. Hard to tell with medieval forest spirits. The next wisp swoops playfully around your shoulder, and you can't help thinking it's judging your posture. You straighten instinctively. The trees gradually open into a small clearing where a stream winds lazily across smooth stones. The shimmering lights gather above the water like a constellation trapped beneath the branches. You kneel by the edge, listening to the steady murmur of the current, a sound so soft and even it could lull anyone into a trance. Medieval people often viewed streams as borders between the human world and the other world, places where magic seeped through like sunlight between leaves. Some believed spirits lived in the water itself, guiding travelers, or if you were particularly unlucky, luring them into underwater kingdoms for impromptu eternal visits. You lean back slightly, deciding you are very much not in the mood for that kind of sleepover. A frog croaks beside you, loud enough to shatter the moment, and you jump. The frog blinks with the blank confidence of an animal who believes itself the rightful ruler of this entire clearing. You nod respectfully, because who are you to argue? You adjust your cloak and watch as the glowing orbs dip toward the stream, hovering close enough that their reflections ripple across the water like molten gold. A particularly bright wisp drifts toward a fallen tree at the edge of the clearing. You follow out of curiosity, ducking around a cluster of ferns. There you spot something carved into the log, a small, weather-worn symbol shaped like a curled leaf, a charm, a real medieval superstition right at your feet. People carve these into wood to gain favor with forest spirits, ensuring safe travels and occasionally requesting help with finding lost sheep, misplaced tools, or in very rare cases, a spouse who had wandered off and apparently needed magical intervention to come home. You run your fingers over the symbol, feeling its grooves, the way the charm seems to hum faintly beneath your touch. The air shifts again. A breeze rolls through the clearing, lifting your hair and carrying with it a faint, sweet scent. Something like crushed mint and warm soil after rain. It feels welcoming, approving even. The wisps brighten in chorus, and for a moment, the entire clearing glows. You let your shoulders relax as the soft light washes over you, the kind of gentle radiance that would make even a skeptic pause. As you continue onward, the forest path seems to widen naturally, as though guiding you deeper with quiet assurance. A tiny flash of movement catches your eye, a small creature darting between the roots of an oak. Maybe a rabbit, perhaps a fox, or possibly one of those folkloric beings people described in manuscripts with suspiciously dramatic flair. One old text claimed the woods were home to whisper hounds, silent canine spirits who helped lost travelers find their way. Another insisted forest sprites wore tiny cloaks made of spider silk. Historians still argue whether these descriptions were symbolic, satirical, or the product of someone who spent way too much time in damp libraries. Your steps slow as you approach a cluster of ancient trees, their trunks wide and gnarled, their branches woven so tightly they form a natural dome overhead. The wisps drape themselves around the space like lanterns, illuminating the mossy ground, the fluttering leaves, the delicate layers of bark etched with age. It feels like a hidden grove, the kind medieval storytellers would describe with a hushed tone, meant to imply, absolutely do not mess around here unless you want magical consequences. You sink onto a fallen log, letting the forest's gentle hum fill your senses. The rhythmic drip of water from the leaves, the soft chirp of a nighttime bird, the distant rumble of the storm you left behind, all of it folds together into a meditative lull. One of the glowing orbs drifts close enough to warm your cheek. You murmur a quiet thanks, unsure whether you're addressing spirits, science, or your own imagination, but the light pulses in response, satisfied. A quirky old belief slips into your memory. Some medieval villagers swore that if you followed a wisp respectfully, it would lead you to good fortune, but if you followed rudely, it would guide you directly into a swamp for a well-deserved lesson in humility. You whisper a sincere compliment about the lighting design, just to be safe. The clearing breathes around you, soft and warm, and though the forest is full of life, there's an enormous calm settling into your bones. The lights dim subtly, as if tucking the world in for the night. The forest seems to hold you gently, as though recognizing a traveler who walks with quiet curiosity rather than fear. And as your eyes soften, adjusting to the low glow, you realize this place isn't just a home for legends, it's a cradle of stillness, humming softly with the stories medieval people whispered when the world felt big, strange, and full of impossible wonders. You take one last slow breath before rising again, ready to wander deeper into the night. You leave the comforting glow of the wisplit clearing behind, following a narrow, winding path that seems to stretch endlessly into the velvet dusk. The forest begins to thin, and the ground underfoot changes from moss to a soft, damp clay that slightly clings to your boots. Every step makes a subtle squish, a reminder that nature, much like medieval life, had a way of leaving its mark whether you asked for it or not. Somewhere off to your right, the faint croak of frogs blends with the whispering of reeds in a nearby marsh. You inhale slowly, savoring the wet, earthy scent that rises like incense from the ground. This is the world between stories and reality, the quiet place where folklore sneaks into daily life. Ahead, the path opens into a wide meadow. The grass sways lazily in a soft breeze, dotted with wildflowers, some you recognize, like daisies, and some so foreign to you that they could belong to another planet entirely. You notice the subtle hum of insects drifting across the air. Medieval villagers would have considered this meadow the perfect threshold between the known world and the realm of strange, inexplicable happenings. Even today, the place holds that liminal quality, the sort of space that invites you to lean in and listen closely. In the middle of the meadow stands a small, solitary stone circle. Weathered and leaning, the stones are carved with faint spirals and runes you can't immediately decipher. You approach slowly, feeling the weight of countless human hands that must have shaped this place hundreds of years ago. A mainstream historical fact settles into your thoughts. Stone circles in medieval Europe were often sites for gatherings, rituals, and storytelling. They were not necessarily magical, but they represented a deep human desire to connect with forces larger than oneself. Historians still argue whether such sites were primarily ceremonial, astronomical, or simply markers for social gatherings. But you don't have to decide. As you wander among the stones, a peculiar sound rises from the ground beneath you. It is soft at first, almost like wind through reeds. But then you realize it is deliberately rhythmic, a deep, hollow drumming that seems to echo the heartbeat of the meadow itself. This is your quirky tidbit. Medieval musicians sometimes played percussion instruments near stone circles during midsummer celebrations, believing the vibrations encouraged fertility, warded off misfortune, or at least entertained spirits. The notion of Acoustic magic was pervasive. Sound wasn't just sound, it was power. You tap a stone lightly with your knuckle, and it resonates more than you expected. A sleepy little echo that makes you grin. Joke number 1. You step carefully around the tallest stone, brushing your fingers along its rough surface. Tiny scratches, marks from tools, or perhaps initials from curious visitors over centuries each, a whisper from someone who came before, someone who wanted to be remembered, or at least to leave a small trace of their presence. The wind picks up, carrying with it the faint scent of burning herbs, and you realize a few villagers nearby must be tending small ceremonial fires, carefully controlled, that release aromatic smoke meant to honor the land or attract benevolent spirits. You pause to inhale deeply. The scent is oddly soothing, almost hypnotic, and you let it fill your lungs. As the evening stretches onward, you notice something moving near the far edge of the meadow. A pair of foxes weaving between the stones with casual precision, one red as a polished copper coin, the other a soft silver gray. Medieval villagers often associated foxes with cunning, trickery, or even fey messengers. Seeing them here feels like more than coincidence, like the natural and supernatural worlds brushing shoulders in an ordinary twilight moment. You whisper a polite greeting, and they pause briefly before continuing their silent choreography, tail tips brushing the ground with effortless grace. Joke number 2. The sky darkens to a deep indigo, but stars begin to emerge one by one, tiny pinpricks of light that shimmer like scattered gemstones. You sit down on a fallen log, the moss soft and forgiving beneath you, and let the weight of the night settle. You recall stories of medieval astronomers who used these very stars to predict seasons, harvests, and sometimes disasters. Some chroniclers claim that the stars were also messengers, guiding travelers or communicating divine will. Historians still argue whether such claims reflect actual observation, allegory, or fanciful interpretation, but the lights above are undeniably beautiful tonight. As you watch the stars emerge, the rhythmic drumming from the ground slows, fading into the gentle hum of the meadow at night. The rustle of grass, distant insect calls, and the occasional low whistle of wind across stones. You close your eyes for a moment, feeling the pulse of the place, a steady, comforting beat that ties the natural world to the subtle heartbeat of human imagination. Here in the quiet of the stone circle, you are both observer and participant, walking through a medieval world where myths, music, and memory are inseparable threads in a single tapestry. One last quirky detail rises as your eyes wander. A tiny mushroom ring forming beneath the tallest stone, its perfect circular pattern a reminder that the earth has its own magic, indifferent to human or fairy intentions. You kneel and touch a cap gently, noting how delicate it feels, the moisture clinging like a soft glaze. In the medieval imagination, such rings were believed to be entrances for fairies or spirits, places to be respected, not disturbed. You chuckle quietly. Joke number 3, you're not entering any fairy realm tonight. Thank you very much. You stand and brush off your cloak, the meadow stretching wide and open around you, breathing in the crisp night air. The forest edges seem closer now, and you feel yourself being guided back toward it, carrying the gentle rhythm of the stones, the foxes, and the drifting stars along with you. Somewhere in the distance, the faint hum of the earlier storm echoes faintly a reminder that the world continues in patterns, rhythms, and stories that you are lucky enough to witness tonight. You leave the stone circle behind, stepping carefully along the soft, earthen path that leads you back toward the shadowed forest. The night has deepened, and the meadow's open expanse now recedes into darkness, replaced by the close, whispering canopy of trees. Every leaf seems to glimmer faintly in the moonlight, wet from the earlier storm, and each step you take is cushioned by the thick carpet of moss that blankets the ground. You notice how the air carries the damp, earthy scent of decomposing leaves, which is oddly comforting in its own way, as if the forest itself exhales a quiet lullaby. A small stream crosses your path, gurgling gently over smooth stones. You kneel and let your fingers brush the cold water, feeling its rhythmic flow under your skin. Medieval people often viewed streams as living entities with their own spirits and temperaments. Some chroniclers even warned that disturbing the flow could invite misfortune, while others believed that leaving offerings, coins, small trinkets, or even herbs might ensure good fortune. You smile to yourself, imagining what you might leave here if you were a medieval traveler. Probably a piece of your lunch, since modern coins aren't nearly as poetic. As you continue, you hear movement among the trees, a soft shuffle, a whisper of branches. Peering through the shadows, you spot a group of deer moving gracefully, their eyes reflecting the faint starlight. Medieval tales often imbued deer with symbolic meaning, messengers, guides, or even manifestations of otherworldly beings. A mainstream historical fact anchors this to reality. Deer were highly significant in medieval forests, both as game for noble hunting and as metaphors in literature and art. You watch them disappear into the underbrush, noting how their presence feels both ordinary and magical, the very embodiment of forest patience. Ahead, the path widens into a small clearing where an abandoned mill sits quietly beside a broad, calm river. The wooden structure creaks gently in the night breeze, and you can almost hear the ghosts of old water wheels spinning. Medieval mills were more than utilitarian, they were centers of village life, meeting places, and sometimes the subject of folklore. Legends claim that some mills could trap spirits in their wheels or produce enchanted flour. Historians still argue whether these accounts were simply storytelling embellishments or reflections of local belief systems. Either way, standing before it now, you can feel the centuries pressing gently against the boards. You step closer to the river's edge, noting the reflection of the moon on the water. The ripples distort the mill and trees into long, wavering shapes. A quirky detail rises. Medieval millers sometimes believed that throwing a handful of flour into the river could appease water spirits or ensure the wheel's smooth rotation. You kneel down, letting the water lap gently against your hand, imagining the rituals that might have taken place here under the silver gaze of the moon. Joke number 1 crosses your mind. Hopefully the water spirits are okay with modern hygiene practices. A gentle wind passes through, carrying the faintest sound of music, flute-like tones mingling with the soft lap of water. You tilt your head, listening. This is one of those subtle, borderline miraculous moments that seem too intentional to be random. Medieval villagers often linked music with weather, water, and spirits, believing that harmonious sounds could soothe restless elements. You follow the melody, noticing how it drifts among the reeds, up the hillside, and into the forest beyond. Your footsteps slow. The world seems to be urging you into a deeper state of awareness, a delicate attentiveness that blends curiosity with calm. On the far bank, shadows shift, revealing what looks like a figure in simple clothing, perhaps a miller's ghost, or maybe a medieval musician practicing under the stars. The figure's movements are rhythmic, almost ceremonial, and you watch with a mixture of awe and mild amusement. Medieval tales sometimes spoke of wandering spirits playing music for travelers, guiding them safely home. Historians still argue whether such accounts describe real individuals, nocturnal villagers, or allegorical storytelling. You decide it doesn't matter. The music is real enough for your ears, and that is enough to carry you onward. You step carefully along the riverbank, letting the gentle current of water accompany your path. The mill recedes behind you, bathed in silver moonlight, its ancient timbers creaking like a slow exhale. The forest edges loom ahead, and you feel the familiar pull of dense shadowed paths inviting you into their embrace. The music lingers, weaving itself through your senses, and your mind softens. Every sound, every rustle, every flicker of moonlight seems to whisper, "Keep walking, keep listening, keep letting the medieval world unfold around you in all its slow, charming strangeness." The river bends, the path narrows, and fireflies begin to appear along the edge of the forest, tiny points of light dancing with the rhythm of the night. You pause, watching them hover above the reeds. The medieval mind might have called them fairies, sprites, or playful spirits. You just call them delightful, a perfect companion for the quiet hours. As the forest swallows the path again, you step forward, following the gentle guidance of light, sound, and memory into another layer of night, where stories are alive and history softly hums beneath your feet. You move deeper into the forest, leaving the river and mill behind, and the canopy above thickens, filtering the moonlight into scattered, silver-green shards. The air is cool and damp, carrying the scent of pine needles and wet earth. Every step is cushioned by a soft layer of moss and fallen leaves, giving you the feeling that the forest is gently guiding your feet along its winding corridors. You notice the subtle symphony around you, the whisper of branches, the far-off hoot of an owl, the soft scurry of small creatures moving unseen through the undergrowth. Medieval people would have considered these sounds alive with meaning, listening for signs of spirits, weather, or neighbors sneaking home from late-night tavern visits. Ahead, you spot a faint glow between the trees. As you approach, it resolves into a small clearing dominated by a twisted ancient oak. Its trunk is thick, gnarled, and hollowed in places, forming natural niches and alcoves. Tiny lanterns hang from its lower branches, their flickering light dancing across the mossy floor. Medieval villagers often attributed special significance to ancient trees. They were considered sacred, home to spirits, and sometimes believed to be gateways between the human and supernatural worlds. You can almost feel the weight of centuries pressing quietly against the bark, a sense that countless eyes, real or imagined, have observed this very spot. Historians still argue whether these beliefs were symbolic, literal, or a clever combination of both. Beneath the oak, you notice a series of small objects arranged carefully in a circle. Tiny carved figurines, feathers, and smooth river stones. Someone clearly intended this as a shrine or offering space. You kneel to inspect it, noting the artistry and care. A quirky tidbit. Medieval folk often left miniature gifts at tree shrines to appease woodland spirits, ensure fertility for crops, or sometimes just to politely ask the forest not to drop acorns on your head. You pick up a small feather and twirl it between your fingers, imagining a traveler centuries ago doing the same, whispering a soft prayer, or perhaps telling a secret only the tree would understand. The forest hums around you, and you realize the wind is now carrying faint, melodic strains, a soft flute or reed instrument that seems impossibly close, yet just out of reach. You tilt your head, listening. Medieval chronicles frequently describe music in woods as a guide or companion for travelers, sometimes calming dangerous animals, sometimes simply creating joy. One story even claims that lost wanderers followed a mysterious melody to safety. You feel a surge of gratitude for the unseen musician, whether human, spirit, or your own imagination playing tricks. Joke number 1 crosses your mind. I hope they accept applause in the form of polite silence. You wander further into the clearing, noting small mushrooms growing in perfect circles around the tree's base. Medieval superstition held that these fairy rings were gateways to other realms or spots where the supernatural was particularly active. Some feared stepping inside, while others, more adventurous, left offerings to ensure safe passage. You step lightly around the ring, feeling a tingling sense of awareness. The air seems charged with energy, not threatening, just alive. The gentle hum of the forest blends with the melody, creating a serene rhythm that makes you sway ever so slightly in time. From a hollow in the oak trunk, a small owl watches you with solemn amber eyes. Owls were considered mystical guides in medieval folklore, associated with wisdom, prophecy, or, in certain regions, trickster spirits. You catch its gaze for a long, deliberate moment, acknowledging a kind of silent, mutual respect. Historians still argue whether the owl's symbolic role reflected genuine belief, poetic storytelling, or a combination of both, but you can't deny the quiet power of feeling seen by this watchful creature. You shift your weight and step backward, letting the owl return to its perch in dignity. As you leave the oak shrine, the melody in the distance drifts upward, interweaving with the low chorus of rustling leaves. A few fireflies hover near your path, their soft glow guiding you along the forest floor. You notice that the path itself seems to have subtly shifted, widening just enough for you to walk comfortably, as though the forest itself is accommodating your journey. A quirky tidbit surfaces in your mind. Some medieval travelers believed the woods could test patience or kindness, subtly guiding those who respected them while confusing those who moved arrogantly or carelessly. You smile, feeling you've passed the test, if such a test exists. The wind rises slightly, carrying a gentle warmth, the faint scent of wildflowers from an unseen clearing, and the rustle of something moving just out of sight. The night feels alive, but safe, inviting you to continue rather than retreat. Your boots crunch softly along the leaf-covered path, and the forest rhythm settles into a steady, comforting cadence. You begin to feel the gentle tug of sleep in your limbs, coaxed not by exhaustion but by the mesmerizing, hypnotic pulse of the medieval woodland world, where myth, sound, and the slow passage of time intertwine seamlessly. You pause once more, taking in the symphony of sounds, the flute-like melody fading into the distance, the soft rustle of leaves overhead, the occasional call of nocturnal birds, and the firefly's gentle flicker. The air is heavy with history, imagination, and the subtle, comforting feeling that every legend you've encountered tonight has left its mark on the very ground beneath your feet. You step forward, feeling yourself guided deeper into the heart of the forest, ready to discover yet another layer of medieval wonder, where myth walks quietly beside you, and sleep begins its gentle, inévitable pull. You follow the forest path as it curves gently downhill, the mossy undergrowth giving way to smoother soil, almost as if the woods themselves have prepared a corridor for you. The soft hum of insects mingles with the distant, barely audible gurgle of a brook. Moonlight streams through gaps in the canopy, casting patterned shadows across the trail, and for a moment, you pause to watch the shifting shapes, letting your eyes trace the intricate choreography. Medieval storytellers might have interpreted these dancing shadows as spirits testing the attentiveness of travelers. You shake your head slightly, smiling at the thought, though part of you, admittedly, hopes the shadows are at least partially right. Ahead, you spot a faint, silvery light spilling through the trees. As you approach, it resolves into a small, abandoned chapel, moss-covered and leaning slightly to one side. The wooden doors creak faintly in the breeze, and the stone walls are etched with the soft marks of age. A mainstream historical fact, rural chapels like this were common in medieval Europe, often erected as places of prayer, reflection, or pilgrimage for isolated communities. Historians still argue whether smaller chapels were primarily religious, social, or simply a territorial claim by a local lord. Either way, it's impossible not to feel the weight of centuries here, a quiet presence lingering in the cool night air. The chapel's interior smells faintly of damp stone, wood, and centuries-old incense, a curious blend that is both grounding and otherworldly. You step inside carefully, boots soft against the cold flagstones. Light streams through a small stained glass window, fragmented by age, illuminating dust motes like tiny floating stars. You notice remnants of old wooden pews, warped with age, and the faded mural on the back wall, depicting a procession of saints, angels, and strangely attentive animals. A quirky tidbit: medieval artists often included animals in religious imagery to symbolize moral lessons, sometimes so subtle that modern eyes might completely miss the joke. You chuckle, quietly joke number one, and trace a tiny, almost imperceptible fox in the mural with your fingertip. A faint, rhythmic tapping draws your attention to the floorboards near the altar. Kneeling, you notice the tiny echo of water dripping from a crack in the roof, each drop resonating like a subtle metronome. Medieval builders often designed churches and chapels with sound in mind, intentional or not, amplifying chants and prayers. Historians still argue whether these acoustic choices were deliberate architectural feats or happy accidents that enriched the sensory experience. You lean back, letting the cadence of dripping water blend with the soft hum of night, a lullaby composed over centuries. A small carved niche in the wall contains a tiny, fragile figurine, a saint with a serene expression, holding what looks like a sheaf of wheat. Medieval villagers often left miniature tokens of gratitude or prayer, sometimes for a good harvest, sometimes for a safe journey, and sometimes just to be polite to the saint. You imagine a traveler hundreds of years ago placing the figurine here, whispering a private hope into the stillness. Stepping back into the forest, the night air feels softer against your skin, scented with pine and moss, carrying the faint echo of chapel acoustics. You notice the ground is slightly softer here, leaves forming a plush carpet beneath your boots. The path ahead seems to slope upward, inviting you forward with gentle insistence. Somewhere in the distance, the faint hum of the earlier storm lingers, muted and comforting, as if reminding you that all natural forces, even the chaotic, have their gentle side. You move forward, guided by moonlight, history, and the quiet rhythm of the medieval night. The forest seems to sigh as you continue, branches brushing softly overhead. Somewhere between the trees, you hear what could be a night bird or the delicate movement of some unseen creature. The combination of light, sound, and scent is hypnotic. Every step, every breath, every subtle rustle of leaf or insect creates a rhythm that seems to soothe your mind and body. The chapel, the stones, the forest, each has left its mark, contributing to this slow, enveloping sense of serenity. By the time you pause to take in the scene again, the pull of sleep is already in your limbs, gentle but insistent, and the medieval world you've been walking through tonight has become a soft, living lullaby. The forest path gradually narrows as you leave the chapel and its soft halo of memory behind. The moonlight dappled in silver along the uneven trail. You notice that the air feels crisper here, infused with the faint, lingering aroma of damp leaves and wild herbs. The night hums gently all around you, the rustle of branches, the distant cry of an owl, the whisper of a breeze through high pine. It is the kind of quiet that invites reflection, the perfect stage for imagining stories carried through centuries. Medieval villagers often believed that such secluded paths were watched over by spirits or guided by invisible forces. Historians still argue whether these beliefs were genuine fears, moral allegories, or clever storytelling devices to keep children from wandering too far. Regardless, the path feels alive beneath your feet, each step both real and enchanted. As you walk, you stumble upon a patch of wildflowers, their colors muted under the silver moonlight but still vivid against the dark soil. You crouch to inhale their scent, sweet, faintly musky, grounding. Quirky as it seems, medieval apothecaries often considered wildflowers as more than decoration. They were used in remedies, potions, and sometimes charms to ward off minor ailments or even restless spirits. You pluck a single petal, feeling the fragile, soft texture between your fingers, and imagine a villager centuries ago doing exactly the same, whispering a private hope into the night air. Moving onward, the path leads to a small, crumbling bridge spanning a trickling stream. The stones are slick from rain, moss clinging in stubborn patches, but it holds firm, a mainstream historical fact. Medieval bridges were marvels of engineering, often built with both utility and local superstition in mind. Travelers sometimes left small coins or offerings in the stones, hoping for safe passage or protection from mischievous spirits said to lurk near waterways. You carefully place one foot onto the bridge, feeling its gentle give, and for a moment, the water beneath seems to reflect not only the stars above, but the accumulated stories of those who crossed here before you. At the far edge of the bridge, a small copse of birch trees stands in neat formation, their white bark almost glowing under the moon. You brush your fingers along one trunk, noticing faint carvings, initials, symbols, or perhaps simple marks of time. Medieval travelers often left such signs as memory tokens or markers of territory, and some believe the trees themselves absorbed these messages. A quirky tidbit. Certain folklore suggested that whispering a secret to a birch at midnight ensured it would remain safe, preserved in the tree's spirit until recalled. You lean closer, whisper a tiny joke about the night's adventures, and smile as a breeze rustles the leaves in acknowledgement. Joke number 1. Continuing, you feel the path start to incline gently. The forest thickens once more, and the canopy overhead filters the moonlight into fragmented patches of soft silver and green. The occasional hoot of an owl or rustle of nocturnal creatures punctuates the rhythm of your steps. You pause to notice a cluster of mushrooms perfectly formed in delicate rings at the base of an ancient oak. In medieval folklore, these fairy rings were believed to indicate places where supernatural activity was especially strong. Some villagers avoided them entirely, fearing enchantment, while others left offerings or danced lightly around them in playful ritual. Historians still debate whether these accounts reflect actual events, symbolic storytelling, or a mixture of both. A particularly vivid ring draws your attention, and you kneel briefly, tracing its circumference with a gloved hand. The forest seems to hold its breath as you do, and for a few moments, the world feels suspended in quiet wonder. You remember the wisplit clearing from earlier, the stone circle, the chapel, and realize these spaces, scattered across the night, share a gentle rhythm, a continuity of human experience across centuries. Each is a pause, a place where magic, myth, and mundane life intersect. As you rise, a soft flicker catches your eye. Fireflies hover like floating lanterns, their golden light shimmering along the path. You follow them silently, noticing how they cluster near the roots of old trees, drifting upward in slow arcs. Medieval superstition held that these tiny lights were spirits or omens, guiding travelers safely or playfully leading them astray. You smile quietly, keeping your steps careful and respectful, the forest's nocturnal rhythm now intimately familiar. The night grows deeper, the air heavier with cool humidity, yet carrying a comforting quiet. Every rustle of leaf, every faint scent, every flickering glow reinforces the hypnotic cadence of this medieval forest. You feel your breathing slowing in sync with the nocturnal world around you, and the stories embedded in every stone, tree, and ripple of water settle softly in your mind. It is as though the forest itself is lulling you forward, inviting contemplation, curiosity, and rest in equal measure. The path begins to widen again as you emerge from the dense birch grove, the trees thinning into a soft, open woodland. Moonlight spills across the ground in silvery pools, illuminating patches of moss and wildflowers. You inhale deeply, the mixture of damp earth, pine, and faint floral sweetness grounding you in the present while simultaneously pulling you back through centuries. Medieval travelers often relied on the natural world for guidance and comfort, reading the forest like a map, noting stars, moss growth, and wind direction. Historians still argue whether such practices were strictly practical or intertwined with superstition. But tonight, your own instincts seem guided by the same ancient rhythms. Ahead, a faint glow emerges among the trees. A cluster of cottages, smoke curling lazily from chimneys into the night sky. Their thatched roofs sag slightly with age, and the walls are softened by moss and ivy. You pause to take in the scene, imagining the life inside, the warm glow of hearths, the quiet murmur of conversation, and the faint scent of bread baking in stone ovens. A mainstream historical fact. Medieval cottages were humble but central to village life, often housing multiple generations and serving as spaces for both labor and storytelling. Historians still argue about the precise layout and social dynamics of these homes, but their enduring presence is undeniable. You step closer to the cottages, noticing small details: a clay pot on a windowsill, herbs drying in the smoke-filled air, and the rhythmic creak of a windmill nearby. A quirky tidbit. Medieval villagers sometimes believed that leaving a broomstick outside overnight could sweep away lingering bad luck or mischievous spirits. You pause to admire a crooked broom leaning against a wall, smiling at the notion that even mundane objects carried subtle magic. Joke number 1 surfaces. Imagine a medieval HOA enforcing broom placement regulations. Moving through the village, you encounter a small square where a fountain trickles quietly, moss clinging to its edges. Water here was not just practical, it was symbolic, sometimes believed to carry blessings or reflect hidden truths. You dip a hand into the cool stream, letting it slide slowly through your fingers. Medieval chroniclers occasionally described villagers leaving tiny notes, coins, or charms in fountains, hoping to influence luck, health, or even dreams. Historians still argue whether these practices were widespread or exaggerated in later retellings, but the tangible sense of ritual and intention remains clear tonight. Beyond the square, a small market stall sits abandoned under the moonlight. Empty baskets and clay jars hint at the day's activity, long since paused. You notice the faint scent of dried herbs and grains lingering in the air. A quirky detail. In medieval markets, vendors often used subtle signs or noises to attract customers or ward off theft, from bells to calling birds. You imagine a clever vendor here, balancing practicality with whimsy, trying to outsmart both customers and mischievous forest spirits. Joke number 2. And here I thought today's farmers' markets were stressful. Continuing past the market, you approach a small chapel, simpler than the one you visited earlier. Its wooden doors are partially open, revealing a dark interior where the faint scent of incense lingers. You step inside cautiously, brushing fingertips along the worn pews. Medieval chapels served as community centers, offering solace, guidance, and sometimes simple entertainment. Historians still debate whether these spaces were more for spiritual needs, social cohesion, or subtle political influence. But in the quiet of the night, the distinction feels unnecessary. A faint whisper catches your ear, carried on the night breeze. Perhaps it is the rustle of leaves, or perhaps a distant villager tending a late fire. You pause, letting the sound settle into the rhythm of the village at night. A quirky tidbit floats to mind. Villagers sometimes left small offerings at chapels to influence dreams, encourage fertility, or simply ensure a good night's sleep. You imagine placing an imaginary token here, smiling at the timeless desire to communicate with forces larger than oneself. You step back outside, the moonlight bathing the village in soft silver. The cottages, fountain, and chapel form a gentle constellation of human life, glowing faintly in harmony with the surrounding forest. You notice the soft flicker of lanterns, the slow sway of smoke from chimneys, and the subtle chorus of nocturnal creatures blending with the whisper of wind through trees. It is a quiet, comforting world where myth and reality coexist seamlessly, and you feel the gentle tug of rest carried along by the rhythm of centuries of human and natural life. You leave the village behind, stepping onto a winding path that climbs gently into rolling hills. The moon hangs low, spilling silver across grassy knolls and casting long, soft shadows from hedgerows and scattered trees. The air is fresher here, tinged with dew and the faint aroma of wild herbs and evening blossoms. Every footfall feels cushioned by the thick grass, and you sense that the landscape itself has a rhythm, a pulse that medieval travelers would have felt keenly. Historians still argue whether such attunement to the land was necessity, superstition, or simply the way humans have always read their environment. Tonight, it feels like the world is breathing alongside you. As you crest the first hill, you notice the remnants of an old stone tower, half collapsed yet stubbornly standing against time. Its silhouette is jagged but noble against the starlit sky, a sentinel from centuries past. Mainstream historical fact: such towers often served as watchpoints or signaling stations, providing early warning of invaders or weather changes. A quirky tidbit: some chroniclers claimed these towers were haunted by former guards, who supposedly whistled through the night, guiding travelers safely or occasionally leading them astray. You smile at the thought, tiptoeing closer, imagining the sound of distant whistling mingling with the night wind. Beyond the tower, a small herd of sheep grazes quietly on a sloping pasture. Their white forms glow faintly under the moon, and you notice the rhythmic clinking of tiny bells around their necks. Medieval shepherds depended on these bells not only for locating flocks but also for symbolic and ritual purposes. Some believed that the bell's sound could protect both the animals and the shepherd from wandering spirits or misfortune. You pause to watch them, the gentle sway of their movements hypnotic, and joke to yourself, definitely safer than GPS. Continuing, You spot a faint trail that leads to a shallow valley where wildflowers bloom in delicate clusters, seemingly illuminated by the moon itself. Medieval herbalists often collected such blooms for medicinal remedies, charms, or simply decoration. Historians still debate whether the lore surrounding these flowers was rooted in actual efficacy, superstition, or poetic embellishment. You kneel to brush your fingers across the petals, imagining a healer centuries ago performing similar rituals under the same silvery light, whispering soft incantations for health and protection. As you venture further into the valley, you notice the delicate traces of an abandoned road, partially reclaimed by grass and wild shrubs. Merchants and travelers of medieval times often relied on these routes, carrying goods, stories, and news across great distances. A quirky fact: some roads were rumored to be enchanted, with travelers leaving small tokens at milestones to ensure safe passage or to appease spirits believed to inhabit the route. You imagine tossing an imaginary token at a weathered stone marker, smiling at the timeless need to leave a mark, however small. A sudden, soft rustle draws your attention. A fox emerges from the undergrowth, its fur gleaming faintly in the moonlight. Medieval folklore often associated foxes with cunning, intelligence, and sometimes mischief. You crouch to watch, noticing the careful, deliberate steps as it pads through the grass, disappearing almost as quietly as it appeared. Historians still debate whether stories about foxes as tricksters reflect genuine animal behavior observations, moral allegories, or a mix of both. You feel a surge of quiet amusement, joke number one, and let the moment settle in your mind. The path slopes upward once more, leading to a grove of oak and ash trees whose branches weave together overhead, forming a natural cathedral. The moonlight streams through, creating a mosaic of shadows across the forest floor. You hear the faint trickle of a stream nearby and the gentle hum of nighttime insects. Medieval villagers often saw groves like these as sacred spaces, sometimes holding small, private rituals or celebrations. Historians still argue whether these were religious acts, social gatherings, or both intertwined. You breathe deeply, letting the forest's nocturnal symphony wash over you, the gentle cadence of centuries enveloping your senses and soothing your mind for the approaching rest of night. The path winds higher now, the grass underfoot giving way to soft earth and scattered stones, and you feel the quiet exertion of climbing, coaxing your muscles awake in a gentle, rhythmic way. The moon hangs low, casting silver light over the hills and valleys below, illuminating a landscape that feels both ancient and profoundly alive. Medieval travelers often relied on such elevated vantage points to survey surrounding lands, estimate distance, and catch signs of weather or human activity. Historians still argue whether their practices were strictly utilitarian or interwoven with superstition, but tonight, the view itself seems to hold the answer in its silent, sweeping presence. At the crest of the hill, you discover a small cairn of stones arranged with deliberate care. Some stones are smooth, others jagged, but together they form a quiet, haphazard monument. A mainstream historical fact: cairns were frequently used to mark paths, boundaries, or sites of ritual significance, especially in remote or treacherous areas. A quirky tidbit: travelers sometimes left small personal objects atop cairns, a coin, a ribbon, or even a tiny carved figurine to signal their passage or curry favor with spirits of the land. You imagine the centuries of hands that have touched these stones, each leaving a subtle imprint of human curiosity, hope, and habit. Nearby, the faint sound of water draws your attention. Following it, you come upon a secluded pond, its surface smooth and reflective like a silver mirror. The pond's stillness is punctuated only by the occasional ripple of a fish breaking the surface or a breeze skimming across the water. Medieval legends often imbued such quiet bodies of water with magical qualities, portals to other worlds, mirrors of prophecy, or simply places to leave prayers and charms. Historians still argue whether these accounts were purely literary or tied to local folk practices. You kneel at the edge, dipping a hand into the cool water and imagining whispered wishes carried silently across the night. A firefly hovers near your hand, blinking slowly, and you smile at its delicate rhythm. Medieval people often interpreted these tiny lights as sprites, spirits, or omens, subtle messengers in the nighttime landscape. You watch the firefly drift away, carrying a tiny spark of imagined communication to the unseen forces of the forest. Joke number 1 crosses your mind. Best messenger service ever. No tracking number required. The sense of gentle companionship in this nocturnal world is oddly comforting, as if the centuries of myth, ritual, and quiet human presence converge in this single, serene moment. From the pond, the path curves toward a distant ridge where the wind sweeps down from higher peaks, carrying scents of pine, earth, and wildflowers. The movement of air is hypnotic, a slow, rocking rhythm that matches your own deepening breath. Medieval travelers often read such winds as signals, marking changes in weather, the approach of distant travelers, or even messages from unseen entities. Historians still debate whether these interpretations were purely practical or infused with symbolic meaning. You let the wind pass over your skin, feeling a subtle, almost spiritual connection with the land and those who walked it long before you. Scattered along the ridge are remnants of a small fortification, low stone walls, a partially collapsed watchtower, and faint impressions of wooden palisades. You trace your fingers over the rough stones, imagining the lives of soldiers or villagers who once depended on this lookout for protection and guidance. A quirky historical note: some medieval outposts were rumored to have been protected by charms, written talismans, or even small creatures kept for their supposed supernatural properties. You can't help but chuckle quietly, joke number 2, as the idea of a tiny magical squirrel guarding a fortress seems surprisingly plausible here. The ridge opens onto a panorama of moonlit hills and valleys, the village you passed earlier now, a faint glimmer in the distance. The forest stretches like a dark, textured blanket across the landscape, interspersed with silver streams and glimmering ponds. You pause, taking in the full sweep of the medieval world beneath your gaze, a mixture of natural beauty, human intervention, and mythic overlay. The wind hums softly, carrying the subtle echoes of countless footsteps, whispered prayers, and quiet rituals. Each element, the hills, the forests, the cairns, the ponds, forms a slow, hypnotic rhythm, guiding your senses gently toward calm. As you begin your descent along the ridge, the night seems to fold around you, shadows deepening and softening simultaneously. The rhythmic pulse of the forest, the occasional sparkle of fireflies, and the gentle rustle of leaves blend into a soothing cadence. The medieval myths that have accompanied you on this journey, ancient trees, haunted towers, mystical ponds, and enchanted animals settle comfortably into the fabric of the night. The world feels both expansive and intimate, each element carefully woven into a soft tapestry of sound, scent, and sensation, coaxing your mind toward relaxation and gentle, inevitable sleep. The path winds downward now, more gently than before, as you descend toward a low, mist-shrouded valley. The moonlight glimmers off the damp grass and the surface of a shallow stream that meanders lazily through the hollow. You pause for a moment, letting the cool air brush your cheeks and listening to the soft chorus of the nocturnal world. The faint trickle of water, the rustle of small creatures in the undergrowth, and the gentle sigh of the wind through distant trees. Medieval villagers believed such valleys often held subtle, magical significance, places where spirits rested, travelers paused, or stories themselves seemed to come alive. Historians still debate whether these were metaphorical ideas, protective superstitions, or literal beliefs, but standing here, you can feel the centuries pressing gently around you. Nearby, a copse of elder trees rises from the mist, their gnarled branches twisting upward like ancient hands. You brush past the rough bark, feeling the subtle grooves and ridges under your fingertips. Medieval myths often associated elder trees with protection, healing, and communication with spirits, sometimes leaving small offerings of bread, coins, or carved tokens at their base. You kneel to imagine placing an invisible token, perhaps a tiny wish or whispered hope, acknowledging the continuity of human curiosity and desire. A quirky tidbit floats to mind. Some chroniclers claimed that elder trees could speak at night, their leaves rustling with secrets only the attentive could understand. You smile softly. Joke number 1 forming gently. I hope they enjoy my terrible whispers as much as the last traveler did. Following the stream, you notice a tiny wooden bridge, moss-covered and slightly uneven, spanning the trickle of water. The craftsmanship is simple but sturdy, with medieval-era practicality written into every plank. Travelers often left small carvings on such bridges, recording initials, dates, or whimsical images. Historians still argue whether these carvings were primarily sentimental, protective, or playful, but each mark feels like a delicate conversation across time. You touch the worn wood, imagining hands long ago leaving similar traces, adding a soft thread to the tapestry of memory woven into this quiet valley. As the path opens into a gentle glade, a herd of deer emerges cautiously from the tree line, their eyes reflecting the moonlight like polished amber. Medieval stories often cast deer as liminal creatures, messengers, guides, or symbols of grace, and seeing them now in the mist feels like a living echo of those tales. You pause and watch quietly, noting the subtle sway of their heads, the soft brushing of hooves against moss, and the barely audible rustle of leaves. Joke number 2 drifts through your mind. If only they accepted tips for posing so elegantly under moonlight. The forest canopy thins further, revealing distant hills fading into soft silver haze. You notice faint smoke curling from chimneys in the village far below, a comforting reminder of human warmth tucked into the natural landscape. The rhythm of nocturnal life, the creak of trees, chirp of insects, ripple of water, distant owl calls creates a gentle, hypnotic cadence. Quirky yet familiar. Medieval travelers often carried the belief that hills and streams could guide dreams, subtly shaping the sleep of those who passed by. You feel the truth of that notion settling around you, a soft, enveloping blanket of sensory reassurance. Continuing toward a final clearing, you encounter a stone circle partially reclaimed by grass and moss, subtle under the moon's pale light. These circles were often linked to rituals, markers, or storytelling in medieval life. Historians still argue whether they were primarily ceremonial, symbolic, or practical. But standing among the worn stones, you sense the accumulated presence of generations of walkers, whisperers, and dreamers. You tread carefully around the circle, letting the cool air and gentle night rhythm carry your thoughts into quiet reflection. Finally, the valley opens fully, and the night sky stretches endlessly above you, stars glittering faintly through a thin haze of clouds. The rhythmic cadence of the forest, hills, and streams now melds into a gentle, immersive lullaby. Medieval myths, the ancient trees, enchanted ponds, fairy rings, watchful animals, and whispering winds linger softly around you, their presence comforting rather than ominous. Your breathing slows, your limbs relax, and the hypnotic pull of the night coaxes every sense toward rest. You feel fully integrated into this ancient, storied world, each step, sound, and scent a soft guide toward deep, dream-filled sleep. The world stretches out around you, calm and tender. The hills and valleys fade softly into moonlit silver, the rustle of leaves and gentle gurgle of water blending into a serene cadence that lulls your mind. You breathe deeply, letting the cool, fragrant air fill your lungs and release tension from your body. Every sound, the distant call of an owl, the whisper of wind through the trees, the faint shimmer of fireflies creates a subtle, soothing rhythm. Thoughts drift like clouds across the night sky, slow and unhurried, merging with centuries of human presence, forest magic, and the gentle pulse of the earth beneath your feet. You feel the lingering comfort of ancient stories wrapping around you, a soft cloak of myth and memory. The images of forest glades, mossy stones, sparkling ponds, and watchful animals settle gently in your imagination, each detail a quiet, familiar presence. The pace of your heartbeat slows, the mind eases, and the pull of sleep grows irresistible, a tide that carries you softly toward rest. Each step, sound, and breeze becomes part of a slow, meditative rhythm, as if the world itself is whispering you into gentle slumber. Allow your thoughts to drift with the night, like leaves on a slow-moving stream. The medieval world, with all its myths, rituals, and quiet wonders, now folds into your imagination, soothing, protective, and calm. There is no hurry here, only the steady, comforting rhythm of earth, sky, and story. You feel safe, relaxed, and ready to surrender fully to sleep, carried by the gentle cadence of centuries past and the soft, lulling present.